Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace.
We don't need their milk. We got a lot of milk.
Dairy is once again at the center of Canada-U.S. trade tension. The U.S. says Canada isn't living up to the spirit of the agreement when it comes to dairy imports.
To ensure long-term certainty of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, the United States is calling for sweeping changes within the dairy market.
Donald Trump is demanding access to Canada's $20 billion dairy market, and Mark Carney isn't just refusing, he legally cannot say yes. Canada passed a law that makes the concessions Trump is demanding impossible to give. The deadline is July 1st, and what looks like a trade dispute is actually something far more calculated than that. Here's what's happening right now. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the deal that replaced NAFTA, is up for its mandatory review on July 1st, 2026, and the United States is walking into that review with one issue at the top of its list: dairy. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer testified before Congress and accused Canada of blocking the market access American producers were promised under the deal. He made it clear that this issue will not be quietly set aside. That message was backed by a bipartisan group of 74 members of Congress who signed a formal letter demanding action, and Trump himself has been calling Canada's dairy tariffs a disgrace for years. His administration is now signaling that dairy access isn't just a negotiating point. It could be a deal breaker. To understand why this matters, you need to understand the scale of what Trump is targeting. Canada's dairy industry is currently worth $16.93 billion and is projected to reach $21.38 billion by 2031. At the production level alone, it generates $21.7 billion annually, supports 221,000 full-time jobs, and contributes $19.9 billion directly to Canada's GDP. And then there's Quebec. 360,000 dairy cows, 137 processing facilities, and a regional economy so deeply tied to dairy farming that it shapes federal election outcomes. This is not a niche sector politicians can quietly trade away in a backroom deal. It is a financial structure, a political identity, and a voting bloc powerful enough to make or break governments. To understand why American producers are frustrated, you need to go back to how Canada built this system. In the 1970s, Canada introduced what it calls supply management, 3 interlocking mechanisms designed to protect farmers from cheaper imports and unpredictable markets. First, production quotas control how much milk each farm can produce. Second, price floors guarantee farmers earn enough to stay profitable. Third, and this is where trade negotiations explode, import tariffs are set at 241% on liquid milk and 298% on butter. Numbers designed not just to protect, but to prohibit. When Trump negotiated the current agreement during his first term, American producers celebrated. Canada had agreed to grant the US tariff free access to 3.6% of its dairy market, a breakthrough after years of being locked out. But here's what the headlines missed. That access exists on paper. In practice, it is almost unusable, because those quotas were allocated primarily to Canadian processors, companies that already rely on domestic milk and have no incentive to import American products. The door was technically open, but it was handed to the one group guaranteed never to walk through it. American dairy groups call this quota manipulation, complying with the letter of the deal while completely killing its intent. And that frustration has been building for years. Now it's boiling over heading into July. The stakes on both sides of this dispute are enormous. Canada has 11,820 dairy farms concentrated primarily in Quebec and Ontario. Any move against supply management isn't just economically risky for Carney, it is politically existential. The Bloc Québécois would weaponize even the smallest concession. Farmers would mobilize, and public opinion in the provinces Carney needs most would turn against him fast. But the pressure on Trump is just as real, because American businesses are not aligned with escalation. More than 150 industry leaders from auto, steel, energy, and manufacturing have warned that the agreement is critical infrastructure for the North American economy. The American Automotive Policy Council has highlighted tens of billions in annual savings tied to integrated supply chains where parts cross the border multiple times before a finished vehicle is complete. A collapse triggered by a dairy dispute would send shockwaves through industries that have nothing to do with milk. Trump is hearing from dairy producers on one side and from some of the most powerful business interests in America on the other. But here is the moment that changes everything. While the US has been building its case, Canada has already moved to make that case irrelevant. The exact concessions Trump is demanding are now illegal for Canada to give. Not politically inconvenient, not strategically awkward, illegal. During the election campaign, Carney argued the law wasn't strictly necessary because his government would never put supply management on the table anyway. But once in power, that same law became something far more powerful than a promise. It became a shield. Now, when American negotiators push for dairy concessions, Carney doesn't need to argue about fairness or economics. He points to the law and says, even if I wanted to agree, I cannot. That single move transformed the negotiation from a discussion into a dead end. And Carney isn't just playing defense. Over the past year, Canada has been quietly building leverage that most American analysts are underestimating. Non-US exports have already doubled, and American exports to Canada have fallen by 10%. These are not coincidences. They are the early results of a deliberate strategy to reduce dependence on a single dominant trading partner.